welcome to Amazing Stories. Today we're diving into a topic that, even though it's over 100 years old, is just as relevant today as it was in its early days, the Ponzi scheme scam. This is Carlo Ponzi, the original, the genius, the con artist who gave his name to what is perhaps the most famous scam in history. And his life. Wow. His life was a series of adventures, scams, and relentless cunning. Let's get to know Carlo Ponzi, probably the greatest hustler humanity has ever seen. Carlo Ponzi, or to be exact, Carlo Pietro Giovanni Guglielmo Tebaldo Ponzi, was born in 1882 in a small town in northern Italy called Lugo, in the province of Ravenna. Picture the scene: a humble father, a mailman by profession, and a mother who came from an aristocratic family, but one that had fallen on hard times, very hard times. For that family, little Carlo was their great hope, their chance to see days of glory once again. That's why his parents made a huge effort, spending their savings to send him to study at the University of Rome at the end of the 1800s. Keep in mind that in that poor Italy with so few opportunities, getting into university was a luxury not everyone could afford. It was the plan to raise the family's status once again. And how did Carlo do at university? Well, let's just say he wasn't exactly a model student. When he arrived in Rome, he started mingling with real aristocrats, people with a lot of money. And of course, young Carlo, feeling like he was true blue-blooded, adopted their ways. He started living it up. Parties, going out with women and friends in abundance, and, worst of all for the family savings, a dangerous passion for card games. He spent a significant portion of the money his parents had worked so hard to earn on gambling. From a young age, Carlo stood out for being a party animal and carefree spirit, but he still had to prove to the world, especially to the land of opportunity, America, that beneath that facade was one of the sharpest and most cunning minds for mischief. After his not-so-successful stint at university, one of Ponzi's uncles suggested he look for a job, even if it was a humble one. Carlo's answer, a resounding no. A gentleman of the elite, even if ruined, would never stoop to working as a store clerk or anything like that. That's when the idea that would change his destiny arrived. Many poor and uneducated Italians go to America and make a fortune, his uncle told him. With your education, your culture, and your good family, you could make a fortune on the other side of the continent. The word fortune sounded like music to Carlo. His mother, desperate, agreed. So with the last $220 they had left, they bought him a ticket to the United States. Carlo traveled on the impressive SS Vancouver, a handsome ship, yes, but it had one big little problem for Carlo. There were people playing cards on board. You can probably guess what happened. When the ship docked at the Boston Pier, Carlo Ponzi had only $2.50 left in his pocket. He had lost almost all the family's money gambling. The next 4 years in Boston were tough. He had to wander around, doing whatever he could. He worked all kinds of jobs: dishwasher, store clerk, insurance salesman. But he never lasted long at any of them. He was fired from many places for overcharging customers. Yes, his knack for scams was already starting to show. After those years of setbacks, he moved to Canada, and for a moment, it seemed like luck was finally on his side. He found a job at a bank, the Zerassi Bank, whose owner, Luigi Zerassi, an Italian, would unknowingly become a great inspiration for the young Carlo. Zerassi Bank attracted customers by offering extremely high interest rates to get people to deposit their money, way above what the competition offered. While others were offering 2%, Zerassi was offering 6%. The excuse was that the other bankers were just stingy. But the reality, according to the story, was much simpler and more familiar. Zerassi was paying the interest to old depositors with the money from new ones. Sound familiar? Yes, he was running a Ponzi scheme before it was even called Ponzi. As you might expect, the house of cards collapsed. Luigi Zarasi ended up fleeing to Mexico, and Carlo was back out on the street. One of the few times in his life that he was left without a job, and it wasn't even directly his fault. One day, wandering around Montreal, he found a check from an old Zarasi bank client in an abandoned shop. So what did our friend Carlo do? He forged the signature. He managed to cash about $400, and with that money, he bought himself fancy clothes and jewelry. Fatal mistake. A police officer saw him, noticed something suspicious, and confronted him. Ponzi ended up confessing. Sentence: 3 years in prison. The first time he set foot in jail wouldn't be the last. As you'll see, it would become a regular occurrence. After serving his sentence, in 1911, he returned to the United States and got involved in another illegal business. He became a coyote, smuggling Italian families across the Canadian border. It didn't last at all. He was arrested that same year. Back to jail again. Another 2 years. He got out of jail in 1913, and something seemed to change. Suddenly, he wanted to do things right. He arrived in Blockton, a mining town in Alabama, eager to work and with an idea to start a company to provide electricity and water to the local mine. He got to work, but things didn't go well. The company just wasn't taking off. One day, a nurse in town suffered severe burns from kerosene. She was in critical condition, and here's where the twist comes in. Carlo offered to donate his skin to her, an act of altruism that earned him the admiration of everyone in Blockton. After the procedure, he had to spend months in bed recovering. And when he finally got back on his feet, surprise! Another company had beaten him to it and was already supplying the mine. Well, at least he had tried. Right? Good intentions didn't last long. Ponzi went back to his old ways. This time, pretending to be a doctor, he treated patients around Alabama until a real doctor caught him and exposed him. He had to make a quick getaway from Alabama and ended up back where he started, in Boston. And it would be here, in Boston, where he would finally set up the grand scheme that would stand the test of time and give its name to future crooks and swindlers. Back in Boston, he met Rose Necco, the daughter of a greengrocer and his future wife. They got married. Once again, Carlo tried to work honestly for his father-in-law, but the produce business went bankrupt. Ponzi, now with a family to support, switched back into entrepreneur mode. He started an import-export company. The idea was to act as a middleman for small businesses, charging a commission. He even rented an office, but that was as far as it went. He didn't have money for anything else, not even for furniture. He walked all over Boston until he found a used furniture store. There he met Giuseppe Daniel, an Italian salesman without many scruples, who had Americanized himself by changing his name to Joseph Daniels. Keep an eye on this name, because it will come up again. Ponzi showed off his negotiating skills and proposed a deal to Daniels, furniture worth $350 in exchange for a $50 down payment and $5 monthly installments. Daniels agreed. Carlo got his office and his furniture. He had everything, except the contacts and the experience needed to make a business like that work. He failed again, but his entrepreneurial spirit was unbreakable. He tried again, a free magazine called Traveler's Guide, hoping to make money from advertising. Another failure. He couldn't get advertisers or content. Do all these attempts to get ahead and not succeed remind you of anyone? But luck was lurking around the corner. One day, he received a letter from Spain. They were asking him for a copy of his magazine that had failed some time ago. Who knows why? There was something odd about that letter, a small sticker worth $1. Ponzi stared at it, fascinated. That little sticker, a simple international reply coupon, would change the entire This is how these stamps worked. If you sent a letter abroad and wanted to get a reply at the same rate, you included these little stamps with it, so you paid not only for your own postage, but also for the return postage. What fascinated Ponzi was that, because of international agreements, the value of the stamp didn't take into account the devaluation of a country's currency. You could buy a stamp with pesetas in Spain and sell it for dollars in the United States. Arbitrage. Ponzi got to work. All he had to do was buy cheap stamps in Europe and sell them for a higher price in the United States. He wanted to do it big. He needed funding. That's what the SEC was created for. Yes, the same initials as the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, but it stood for Securities Exchange Company. Ponzi had the idea and the company. Only investors were missing. And who showed up one day at his brand new office, furnished with items bought on installment? Joseph Daniels. He was furious because Ponzi hadn't paid the furniture installments. But that day, Daniels left not only without his money, but also as the first investor in Ponzi's SEC. You can't deny it, Carlo was a born businessman. As he wrote himself in his biography, by January 1, 1920, I had gathered exactly 18 investors. The snowball had started rolling downhill and picked up speed when, in the second week of February, he paid his first investors. He gave them $2,478 on top of their original investment. Ponzi sold investors promissory notes, the famous Ponzi notes, promising to pay 50% interest in just 90 days. Supposedly, he achieved this through stamp arbitrage. When people saw that he was actually paying out, word spread like wildfire. Satisfied clients brought their friends, and those friends brought even more friends. Things escalated so much that Ponzi reduced the time to earn profits to 45 days. As crazy as it sounds, in theory this made it seem more realistic, since about 40 days was how long it took a ship to make a round trip between Europe and America. The scheme spun out of control. By June 1920, more than 30,000 people had invested in Ponzi. There was so much money that not even all the international reply coupons in the world combined were enough to pay the promised interest. And here comes the part that might disappoint you if you were hoping Carlo was some kind of undiscovered genius. Ponzi didn't invent the Ponzi scheme. Even back then, there was the English phrase, rob Peter to pay Paul. And Luigi Zarassi was already doing something similar in Canada. In fact, 21 years earlier, a man named William Miller had gone to jail for a similar scheme in which he promised extremely high returns. Ponzi's genius was in perfecting it, taking it to a whole new level, and above all, making it so popular that it ended up bearing his name. Everything seemed to be going smoothly at Carlo's office, which was flooded with investors' money. Until one day, who showed up again? Joseph Daniels, the furniture guy. After seeing his fellow countrymen's tremendous success, he demanded 50% of the company. Just like that. Daniels, another hustler cut from the same cloth as Ponzi, was willing to go all the way. He argued that the furniture he had given on credit back then had been an investment in the fledgling company. He even sued Ponzi. To avoid a scandal, they reached an agreement. Ponzi paid him $50,000 as compensation, which would be about $750,000 today. It was truly insane, since this guy had only given him the furniture on credit, but as the saying goes, a thief who steals from another thief. To keep up the appearance of legitimacy for his scam, and maybe so other bankers wouldn't catch on to his insolvency, Ponzi bought a bank, the Hanover Trust. For a while, he lived in absolute abundance. Luxury, extremely expensive clothes, an ostentatious mansion. He was even planning a trip to Italy with his wife Rosa to visit his mother. The kid had made it. Thanks to him, his family was rich again. However, the happiness wouldn't last long. Richard Grossier, the owner of the Boston Post newspaper, started snooping around the case. Encouraged, perhaps, by Daniel's lawsuit, he decided to thoroughly investigate Ponzi's operation. At first, the articles the Boston Post published about Ponzi had the opposite effect. What seemed like an exposé actually worked as free publicity and attracted more investors. But Grossier didn't give up. In July 1920, he hired Clarence Barron, owner of Dow Jones Company and the Wall Street Journal itself. Barron, with a mind for numbers, came to a devastating conclusion. The returns Ponzi's company was offering had no mathematical basis whatsoever. Ponzi's SEC was supposed to have generated $15 million in just a few months. Barron's calculation was simple. During those same months, the total value of all the international reply coupons circulating worldwide didn't exceed $500,000. In one last desperate attempt to save his business, Ponzi made a huge mistake. He hired William McMasters, a journalist from the Boston Post. He paid him to write positive publicity about him in the newspaper. But there was someone willing to pay more, the Boston Post itself. They paid McMasters $600 to betray Ponzi, and McMasters went through with it. He wrote a scathing article labeling Ponzi as hopelessly insolvent. And to top it off, another article exposed his dirty laundry from the past, his work at the fraudulent Saroshi Bank and his time in prison for forgery and human trafficking. And then, yes, the Ponzi scheme collapsed. It's estimated that investors lost nearly $20 million. To give you an idea, those $20 million from 1920, adjusted for inflation, would be about $300 million today. However, his story didn't end there. During his trial, it was discovered that Ponzi had spent much of the investors' money on personal luxuries, such as properties, jewelry, and expensive clothes. What's more, his promise to pay 50% interest in 45 days was completely unrealistic, which made his scheme even more fragile. The scandal also had a huge impact on society at the time. Trust in investments plummeted, and many people felt betrayed, not just by Ponzi, but by the financial system as a whole. Regulatory authorities were forced to take action to prevent something similar from happening again, which led to the creation of new laws and regulations in the financial market. After the collapse, Carlo Ponzi was prosecuted and sentenced to between 7 and 9 years in prison. Thanks to his good behavior, he managed to reduce his sentence to 4 years. He was released in 1925. And what did this tireless entrepreneur do next? He moved to Florida, changed his name to Charles Borelli, and tried again with a new business. This time, he was offering a 200% return in 60 days to anyone who invested with him. Yes, that's right. Carlo Ponzi was creating another Ponzi scheme. The Florida authorities caught him quickly, and it was back to jail. With this, it was the 4th time he had set foot in a cell. But he didn't serve this sentence. He was fed up. Somehow, he faked his own suicide to escape. He boarded an ocean liner and worked as a waiter for a few days until he was discovered and sent back to jail again. The 5th time, the US authorities, probably already desperate, decided to deport him to Italy. There, he divorced his wife Rose and, with plenty of free time, wrote his autobiography, The Rise of Mr. Ponzi. The problem: he didn't have any money to publish it. But our friend Carlo never ran out of ideas. He came up with a novel and original way to get funding. He decided to sell 1,000 shares of the book at $20 each, offering a 100% return to investors. Yes, another mini Ponzi scheme to finance his book about the Great Ponzi Scheme. As you might expect, it didn't work out very well. he barely managed to self-publish the book in 1939. That same year, Ponzi traveled to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He got a job at the office of an Italian airline. It was his last chance, his last opportunity to work honestly, to earn a living like everyone else. And just then, World War II broke out. The airline went bankrupt and Carlo Ponzi ended up in Brazil, broken down and out. Shortly after, in 1949, Carlo Ponzi died of natural causes in a hospital in Rio de Janeiro. Do you know how much money he had left? Just $75 from the Brazilian government subsidy. That was the end of probably the greatest hustler in the history of mankind. A con artist whose name, by a cruel twist of fate, would transcend the limits of time. Today, Ponzi's scheme is an entry in dictionaries of every language to define a fraudulent scam that, even now, is more relevant than ever. Proof of this is the story of people like Bernard Madoff, considered the modern-day Carlo Ponzi, who ran a similar scheme for 20 years without anyone noticing. The story of Carlo Ponzi is fascinating, yes, but it's also a warning, a reminder of how unchecked ambition, lack of scruples, and the promise of easy money can blind many and leave others in ruin. And so we conclude this amazing and mind-blowing story of Carlo Ponzi. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked this journey through the life of one of the most famous con artists, leave us a like to support us. That helps a lot. Tell me in the comments, did you already know this story or the one about Madoff? And most importantly, if you want to keep discovering the most amazing corners of history with me, subscribe right now so you don't miss any of our upcoming adventures. See you in the next amazing story.